Yes.
Chris, you're still muted. It shows
I am.
there you go. There you go. You got it now. There you go.
I'll just be quiet until you're ready for me.
Good afternoon. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Um, come on in and grab a seat. If you are in the room and you have a cell phone, if you can please silence it, it would be greatly appreciated. If you are on Zoom, I would appreciate if you stay muted. If you have a question, though, at the end, you could put your questions in the chat, and we can ask the speaker. And Henry Logan is here, and she has an announcement.
Hi, my name is Henry Logan, and I have the privilege of chairing the ILR board. It has been an extraordinary summer term. I think you'll agree this Hot Topics program has been quite just an amazing event. And we've enjoyed so much having all the different speakers, and then you all chose the actual topics. The exciting thing is that in the fall, we are also going to have a Hot Topics. It will be on Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock. So you'll be able to carry on with this idea of what's new and what's hot and what we would like to talk about. I want to thank our facilitators, Danae Wright and Dale Campbell. You have done a great job of pulling together some very, very exceptional presentations. I also wanted to make an announcement that our fall kickoff for our fall courses is September 21st. It's at 2 o'clock. We will convene in this room and we will hear from the facilitators. We will hear something about each one of the courses, and some of the individual facilitators will be here. And it promises to again be an exceptional fall term. We know we have something to do with the solar system to intrigue some of you, as well as two more wonders, and those individual presentations are always wonderful. I brought along some save the date for our fall kickoff, which I will be distributing, but now I want to turn it back over to Dale.
Thank you so much. Let me say, for those of you who are surprised, we're doing this session on Zoom, and let me say I can think of no other individual I'm about to introduce who can do a better job and capstone of the diverse policy issues we're facing today. And in fact, Chris, thank you so much. I know you're on vacation, and so he agreed to take time to do this for us, and so much appreciation. Dr. Chris Mullin is currently the Strategic Director of Data and Measurement for the Lumina Foundation, an independent private foundation many of you know about in Indianapolis, committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. Previously, and many of you may have known him in these roles, he served as Director of Strong Start to Finish at the Education Commission of the States. He was Executive Vice Chancellor of the Florida Community College System. He also served as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Policy and Research at the State University System of Florida Board of Governors. And he also served as a Program Director for Policy Analysis at the American Association of Community Colleges and at his postdoctoral fellowship at the Illinois Education Research Council. He holds his bachelor's degree in art education and doctorate in higher education from the University of Florida. And I'm proud to say he's one of our program's recognized distinguished graduates, which is selected competitively, not by the faculty, based upon their achievements. He also earned his master's degree in education from Teachers College, Columbia University. So as you can see, he has a breadth of perspectives. As I can think of no one better suited to kind of wrap up and touch on the broad topics that we started about the challenges in higher ed, from immigration to Supreme Court decisions to other things that impact higher ed, and what are the role of the foundation and how they're responding in this chaotic environment. Dr. Chris Mullin.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you everyone for finding time to be with me today. It's a real honor and privilege to be with you as I share some thoughts. I look forward to the question and answer period. So I'll start with some remarks and then look forward to the discussion that will follow. Efforts to make America great again are shaping society is and how people will experience it. We all know that Lyndon Johnson coined the Great Society in the 1960s to describe new programs aimed at reducing poverty, eradicating racial injustice, and expanding social welfare. Today, President Trump is reevaluating many of those programs as he cuts funding and reallocates resources. He is doing it with speed, processes, and perspectives that have spurred outrage and debates, but also, for some, relief that their views are being heard. One sector affected by these abrupt changes is less well known, nonprofits, which grew healthy and contributed generously in the past decades. There are about 2 million nonprofits across the nation, from Feeding America to the Anti-Defamation League, that fill gaps for augmented services not provided by government or business. But a new report shows that 84% of nonprofits expect or have already seen funding cuts. As the definition of a great society is being remade, the nonprofit entities that long carried its banner are being upended. Given that nonprofits get 80% of their revenues from government grants, the actions of the White House and the Department of Government Efficiency are having a direct impact. Further, President Trump's numerous executive orders and policy shifts affect which nonprofits will remain intact to provide services. The result, nonprofits across the United States are in turmoil as they wrestle with fierce headwinds that affect their livelihood and their contributions to society. Make no mistake, many Americans want change. Their votes made that clear. They were tired of the Gordon Gekko-ish restructuring of businesses, a predatory financial system that resulted in the Great Recession, unchecked funding to other countries, a confusing regulatory system, too much focus on elite colleges, and too little focus on everyday people. They wanted a new way forward. But is this the right path? These changes and shifting policies touch on everything from our health to work to education to social services to how others see our identity. The nonprofit sector often helped individuals and organizations navigate challenges. Now, as the government narrows its scope and nonprofits can't fill in the gaps, we are left to wonder what will fill the void, if anything. Recent shifts remind me of a celebratory dance at a wedding, the type where friends gather around a married couple by holding hands and then closing in tighter, creating a sense of community and support for the couple while non-circle members are cast aside. This feels like where we are today, with some people pulled inside the circle and many others left out. But how we got here is not as simple as a dance. It occurred over decades. In the early 2000s, each function of government was entrusted to carry out a leader's policies as if they were their own small business. Department leaders hired the expertise they needed to meet their need and long-term objectives. Then in the 2010s, the model shifted. Departments transitioned into franchises. They were still able to use their own expertise. There was an increased standardization for what expertise informed near and long-term goals, all fitting more tightly within the leader's wishes. This pushed nonprofits increasingly to the side. In the past several years, it might be fair to say, the model shifted yet again. No longer are government functions trusted to carry out the policies of elected leaders. Rather, as I see it, government now operates like a private company where each function is under the direction and applies the expertise of a select set of partners. Partners that align with a particular view are embraced, while critics who pursue a more perfect union are often ignored or excluded. Quasi-governmental in structure, nonprofits are tax exempt and focused on being a public good over profits. A mission drives them, whether it be to provide social services, run crisis hotlines, offer disaster aid, support education and training programs, or drive community development. Nonprofits are also economic powerhouses, spending $2 trillion annually and employing about 12 million people. In all of these ways, they have become a source of great pride and service to our nation. In spaces and places for people and communities too small to matter, in rooms where people speak in millions, billions, and trillions of dollars, nonprofits are like tree roots, providing a nourished environment for growth, the type of growth that relishes sunshine. But now, budget cuts, policy decisions, economic uncertainties, and fewer donor contributions endanger that growth, especially for projects on education, healthcare, food insecurity, the environment, and international aid. These provide urgent care for people, but at last count, U.S. nonprofit layoffs totaled about 23,000 people. Nonprofits typically just keep a few months of capital on hand. Their leaders are constantly seeking stability. Think of a line graph with bumps here and there, but little change. A stable operation frees up people to focus on the mission. It allows nonprofits to plan strategically and time to survey the landscape and engage with partners. And yet, maintaining that fairly straight line, as we know, isn't always easy. We all know of executives spending their days in our nation's state houses, working to ensure their line item is safe, or that a new policy doesn't result in catastrophic impacts on their ability to survive. To survive and thrive, nonprofits need a newly refreshed business model, one that prioritizes agility and resilience. Nonprofits need to communicate effectively by telling the story of the people who depend on the nonprofit, emphasize the value it brings to them and their community. Remember that in today's world, photos and videos capture the public's attention, and platforms permit for a range of contributions to be made. Nonprofits need to stay highly informed and involved. They need to be alert to changing facts and new opportunities as the sector evolves. Nonprofits need to embrace then evolve. And as access to decision-making is restricted, they need to be ready to embrace a vision, then evolve to find alignment wherever possible while holding true to their roots. Not all new ideas are necessarily bad ones. And they really need to work as a team by broadening, strengthening, and renewing their relationship with partners, funders, donors, and policymakers. They develop and maintain a small army of advocates to help them weather the storm. And finally, they need to expand and diversify their funding sources. By engaging locally into family foundations, they can partner with businesses for volunteers, donations, and sponsorships to maintain their operations. Change is never easy, but it's essential. Our nation needs nonprofits and their contributions and innovations. But innovation rarely happens under duress. My father, for example, was a genius inventor with multiple patents and didn't have a college degree. But too often he had to set those ideas aside to earn a living and raise a family. It's time to throw nonprofits a lifeline. Working together, we can help them weather this storm for the sake of the children and adults they help, the workers they employ, the communities they serve, and the nation we all love deeply. With that, I'm open to questions and conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Again, we're going to try to alternate and make sure everyone gets at least one question, and that is also true for those who are joining us online. So who's first today?
Thank you for that discussion. Years ago, the standard deduction on our taxes increased dramatically, and a lot less Americans now itemize, which include charitable deductions. Any comment of how you believe or it's known that may have affected people's charitable giving?
Thank you for the question. I don't have a direct understanding of the impact on charitable giving. I do know that we track it very closely at a foundation. Lumina is a private nonprofit that was founded in 2000 with the sale of a body of student loan funds, the USA funds, to the federal government. And so we had a corpus, we're a sustaining foundation. For every dollar we put out the door, we have to make that plus inflation and others back. So we have a finance team that pays very close attention to the tax policies. but it's not something that's in the area of my expertise.
Hi, thanks very much. You said that nonprofits are going to have to change and evolve. Many nonprofits already include strong commitments to DEI. How would you suggest they evolve going forward?
Yeah, part of what's happening in that particular space at this moment is a lot of legal interpretations. And so the question is, how do you continue to carry forward the commitments of your mission? And it might be that you have to diversify your revenue sources to individuals and entities that will support that work. My understanding of the legal implementation, for example, in the state of Florida, is that state taxpayer dollars cannot be allocated for those activities. What I understand, and I haven't seen it in talking with a colleague, is that student fees can be used to raise revenue for those, as an example. And so what I think you're seeing is the funding sources are going to have to change to allow institutions and organizations or nonprofits to remain committed to their missions and strongly held beliefs if they don't align with legal interpretations of how different federal dollars can be used.
Yeah, I want to follow up with what Jeff said in his question about a tax situation. Just for your information, in the big, beautiful, disgusting bill that for high-end donors, there's a 5% reduction that cannot be used for your tax deduction in 2026. So again, it's a kind of to a certain degree disincentivizing certain high-end donors by just annoying them.
That's true. I mean, my understanding, and I'm not a tax policy expert, is that things change from time to time. And so part of the conversation is it's personal, right? How do you choose to reallocate the resources you might have available to you? And is that incentive enough of a reason not to contribute to a cause? And I think nonprofits really have to have the honest conversation, and they likely are, about the impact of what's happening and understanding that the bottom line, it does disincentivize individuals from making donations. And there's multiple reasons people make donations, right? And so I think the nature of the conversation will have to change as a result of that, about the purpose and intent.
Thank you for your presentation. I worked for USAID for many years and have a lot of experience with NGOs overseas. I was struck that many of them, the big ones, the salary scale, at least at the top, was considerably higher than anybody in the government I knew was making, and even including the political level. You mentioned that they're going to have to become more like private companies. And I guess at least the government sense is that private companies always make more than the government people. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that. I mean, I always assumed that their high salaries at the top were because they didn't have any kind of secure grasp on their job like a government official would. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that and part of the perspective driving these conversations, I spent 5 years working in, actually a little over 4 years working in federal policy issues during the Great Recession from 2009 to 2013. I think that's part of the question and why we're seeing some of the actions we're seeing. Anecdotally, to your point, in this January, I was hosting a convening in New Orleans, and I went out to dinner with somebody from a very large nonprofit, and we were talking about doing an environmental scan of an issue. And the person offered to do it for me for a price, and then jokingly said, if you were the government, I would have charged you 10 times as much. And so executive compensation is one part of that, but I think there was this open question about the extent to which some of the larger nonprofits were really redirecting the funds to the mission and purposes. On the other hand, It's also about offering a competitive salary to bring more individuals into those leadership roles that might be in the spaces and places where decisions are being made by private companies. It'd be nice to hire somebody and pay them $100,000 to run a multinational corporation. But if they're not in spaces and places where conversations are happening, it can also disadvantage the nonprofit itself. And so this idea of compensation does get very tricky, but at a minimum, it is a talking point that contributes to, some of the questioning about where taxpayer money really is going if the large organization does receive a good chunk of taxpayer dollars.
Bill Rossi is my name. Thank you very much for your presentation, but I would like to move away for a few moments from nonprofits. And I'd like to hear some discussion about something that you said, which is change is difficult, but change is essential. I would like to hear some discussion about whether the change that we are undergoing now is good change or not. And in particular, I'd like to focus on three things. One, DEI. How is that bad or is it good? Two, the environment. Is it true that greenhouse gases are not dangerous to human beings? And third, the effort to try to control higher education in this country. I mean, those are very significant changes. And I'd like to hear some discussion about whether they're good change or not.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I will say I'm not an expert on greenhouse gas emissions or policy or things in this space. I know a very large deal about higher education. And your question about good change or bad change is one that ultimately we're going to have to see, right? What is clear, and well, what I see as being clear is a tightening of who has access to inform the discussion. And I think if you look at a governing principle around democracy, the more people who have an opportunity to contribute to the discussion, the greater sense of cohesion you have amongst the community. And so if that's the criteria you use for good, then it's not heading in the right direction. If your criteria for good is a smaller, more efficient, more responsive, less costly operations, then the change towards more of a tightened circle, the dancing analogy I gave you, might be seen as positive. The challenge is you have both leadership structures and orientations, and then topic areas as well. And so the shift in the structure of how decisions are being made is necessarily impacting the number of voices and perspectives that are allowed to inform those deliberations. That's what I'm seeing, not being an expert in particular issues. Does that answer your question, or where would you like to pull from there?
Higher education.
Higher education, yeah. Higher education is undergoing a substantial change right now. And it needs to. All of us who wake up every day and work all day long on the higher education enterprise know some truths, some fundamental truths. One is we're critically important to the communities and the nation's prosperity. Without higher education, we would never have developed advancements in science and medicine and health and the things that we have been known to do and have created such a strong and vibrant business community and such a strong nation writ large. We also know that when we serve students, there are 43 million students in America, that's larger than the population of California, who started college and never finished. The idea that we will have you enroll and pay substantial amounts of tuition and not have you finish has been a challenge. Our ability as a sector to make the structural changes necessary to encourage and support student success is problematic. And as they say, the hardest, animal to kill is a mascot. There are, in places and spaces across this country, there is substantial population declines. And there are universities that are just barely holding on. And the question is if they're viable or not. These are a lot of headwinds all happening at the same time. And we need to figure it out. Some actions, when we look at the question I get a lot, I just spent the past 4 days in Minneapolis, Minnesota with the state higher education executive officers, chancellors, chief academic officers, and provosts running systems across the country. There are about 600 people there, and about half of them were actually from state agencies, all working very hard to figure out how to best serve their communities. We had chancellors from the Florida University system was there, from Kentucky, I had conversations with, among many others. And they're all trying to unpack a very challenging time. Decreasing enrollment, decreasing funding, increased scrutiny, and a continued questioning of the value of what we offer, in part because we as a sector have not ensured that students come to us, leave with something of value in their hands.
Thank you for your talk. I'm certain that a lot of people here are as surprised as I was to hear that not only has the government cut funding for nonprofits, but now they're also in trouble because those that contribute have been holding back, maybe trying to save their own resources. Do you know of any place where we could go to find out our favorite charities and how they're faring right now? Because certainly I would like to adjust some of my donations to where it's the most needed.
That is a wonderful question. There's the statistics on charitable organizations, and I think they might have some information. I'm trying to think of a data source that you can use to do that. I'll have to look into it and think back. But however, if you already know that there are organizations important to you, certainly look at them. You can look at 990 forms and get some idea of the financial standing of organizations, although they will not show so much the recent changes. A part of this right now is the past 6 months, and I work largely in the education space, the higher education space, and particularly state and federal data and infrastructure work. There have been substantial changes and reductions in force and canceling of contracts. Some of those they realized were critical and are bringing back. Some are not being brought back. And so I have a role right now as a grant maker. My job is to invest our money wisely to best serve the public good. As everything started to unfold in February and March, I actually put a stop on really putting money out the door. And I've waited to kind of see, of all the nonprofit partners who have been impacted, which ones might have had their impact lessened or the cuts restored, and the answers aren't fully in yet. And that's the hard part right now for all of us who have an opportunity to support the nonprofit sector, is to understand when have the cuts or the changes hit the bone, and has any meat been put back on it, and then how do we work to augment that in a way that helps it be sustainable? And so it's extremely dynamic at this point in history and this point in time. to really know even the data that we have, because something that we thought was here today might not be there tomorrow. And it's a very uncertain time to make decisions based on prior performance.
Thank you. One of the factors that I think is influencing the nonprofit sector is a decision by the Internal Revenue Service to no longer enforce the Johnson Amendment. Johnson Amendment came from the 1950s from Lyndon B. Johnson when he was senator, and it called for nonprofits to refrain from endorsing partisan political candidates and to not provide funding for those candidates. So basically, it was an effort to not only promote separation of church and state, because churches are nonprofits in general, as well as creating a separation between electoral funding that is non-tax deductible and the electoral funding that would come through these nonprofits. So it forbade that. In the last few years, there really hasn't been that much enforcement. But there has been a decision under Trump that the IRS would no longer enforce the Johnson Amendment. What do you agree that this is an important impact on the nonprofit sector?
So I think enforcement in general is an important mechanism, because we pass laws and regulations for a reason. I will say in one of my jobs in my professional arc, somebody called me and said, I'm trying to have somebody intervene because I know fraud and abuse is going on. I had a conversation with a governmental entity, shared kind of the concern that actually a few people were expressing. And the response was, we don't have enough staff to respond to all these challenges. We only have a staff to, when the problem gets big enough financially, then we will intervene. So the idea of enforcement is exceptionally challenging. If we look at current actions to reduce staffing, I think no matter the amendment, no matter the issue, enforcement is increasingly going to become difficult to maintain. The only open caveat to that is the ability with which a big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence can start to help to catch the details and create flags. That might change the enforcement structure as we move forward. It almost reminds me of the movie from the 1990s with Tom Cruise called Minority Report. That's kind of where we're headed. So I agree that there's challenges in a lot of places with enforcement on a range of issues that impact both nonprofit, public, private institutions across the board.
Hi, Chris. It's Dave Pelham. Good to see you. I was interested in when you were talking earlier about the need for closer partnerships. One dimension that you mentioned was closer partnerships among the foundations themselves. Now, I know that there are sort of informal partnerships among a lot of the national foundations and even the National Foundation with smaller regional foundations. But I guess my question is, how would you view that? I mean, how would you view that closer partnership? What would that look like, and how might it come about?
Sure. So thank you, and good to see you, my friend. I'll say last week I was in a conversation at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago in Detroit, and I spent an hour with leaders from across the country in the manufacturing sector, having a conversation really about this issue in and of itself. And I will share that in the education philanthropy space, And the national and more state level foundations um, work hard to cooperate. And that's a little different than collaborate. Collaborate is where you do a shared thing. Cooperate means where you talk together and really identify the areas that you're going to focus on, and where possible, fund things together. You know, I've been working in philanthropy for almost 5 years now. Before that, I received almost $50 million in funding to run programs. So I'm somewhat familiar with philanthropy, though I still have a lot to learn. And I think, and what I've learned, a reflection for me, is that we operate really like academics. Each program officer and each foundation has its own area of focus or interest or study. And so the hard part is, how do we work together if my colleague wants to focus on rural students in community colleges? Another colleague wants to focus on HBCUs and urban core. Another partner wants to focus on leveraging the CHIPS Act allocations and investments to increase and modernize workforce in the places that get them. And so while we are in constant conversations with each other, we also recognize that each foundation and then each uh, person entrusted with being a steward of the resources of that foundation almost need to have their own identity. And that's what creates the collaboration to be so hard, because we have jobs too. And if we are not being perceived as making investments that help advance our public purpose, then we have questions. And so we operate much more like, I'd say, academics than I thought we did. Does that answer your question?
He said yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. You gave a statistic that I found really frightening before, which was that 48 million students have basically failed out of college. And they dropped out because for various reasons. And it seems to me that so much more effort needs to be put into elementary schools and preschool and elementary school, and that so much of the money is being wasted unless it goes there, because then you're going to have the same problem over and over again. We're going to have a large amount of people who aren't prepared for our modern society because their education is not keeping up. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's a both and. Thank you for the question. It's that a reason many people stop out of college is not purely academic. Right? I worked with a distinguished professor at the University of Texas, and he was telling me about his math classes and how he just took over teaching them because of the approach some professors have about look to your left, look to your right. Some of you won't be here soon. That sounds great, but we have to remember higher education is a choice people make, right? A truancy officer does not show up at your house if you don't go to college. People are choosing to not work and to come in and better themselves. So the orientation, I think, around what it means to educate more masses, I think, is one part of the conversation. Secondly, I'd say the reason adults also stop out is because life happens. If you do well in school, for example, myself, I did well in school. I went to college on the federal Pell Grant, the Florida Student Assistance Grant, the Chappie James Most Promising Teacher Scholarship, and the Florida Undergraduate Scholars Fund. I had to work every Christmas break or holiday break and all summer long just to have enough money to be able to pay my bills. I was $500 away from a disaster, and that's not uncommon for many students. It's not uncommon for students to have a relative who becomes sick. The spring after I graduated from college, my mom had breast cancer, and I had to move home and take care of her and her house to make sure she was okay. Had that happened 1 year earlier, I likely would not have finished college. a large percentage of students go to school and work at the same time, there are situations where courses are not structured or organized in ways that allow students to work and go to college. They want to teach the class at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and it doesn't matter if your shift can't be covered or you can't shift it out. So institutions have a responsibility to look at who they're serving and adjust teaching accordingly. So the linear lockstep way that we've structured and thought about higher education to serve a greater number of students needs to change. It works for people who can go full time and have the flexibility and resources to manage risk, right? I went to Columbia. I saw the wealth that was there and the orientation people had. I've also been on the ground in institutions that are serving the very people and Americans we need and care most about, right? The ones for whom the Great Society was created. And for those who are even successful when they get to the end of high school, there are challenges. K-12 has had some challenges, but they have also made some really strong strides. I had the pleasure of working in a senior level role in the Florida Department of Education along Commissioner Pam Stewart. Saw the data, saw the stories, and saw the real growth. The most fascinating thing to me is when you ask a high school principal what's the hardest thing to do to get students to graduate, their answer is for the students to pass English. When you ask a college president, a community college president largely, what's the biggest barrier for students completing college? Their response is math. Because what happens in high school is they haven't finished math real early, and then students spend 2 years not taking any math classes, and then they show up and have to start all over again. For 3 years of my life, I ran a national initiative around developmental education math and English. 13 systems of higher education and 400 colleges and universities were a part of this work. And what we realized is what we thought was a great intervention, being developmental or remedial education, turns out to be a path to nowhere and probably one of the worst interventions that we can help. It's better to put students in more rigorous courses and provide what we call a co-requisite or 1 hour supplementary class every week to help them be successful. So part of this is, yes, there are early childhood interventions are critically important. I actually taught early childhood education in Midtown Manhattan, helped 2 professors at Columbia write a book on preschool assessment measures. And I don't want to underscore the importance of early childhood education. I also want to say that we can't just have the reason can't just be because students are at a deficit, that we as institutions of higher education have a responsibility to make sure those 43 million Americans who started and stopped have a path backwards and forward to being successful.
Other questions? All good? All right. Let's express appreciation to Dr. Mullin. Chris, thank you so much for being with us. Very thoughtful comments, and we appreciate all your leadership and work, and keep it up, my friend. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your time. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah. As was indicated early, again, my apologies are conveyed from Danae, was not able to be here today with us due to a faculty meeting at the law school. So we can all relate to that, many of us. But as was announced, we are very pleased that this series is going to continue in the fall. And so if you have any thoughts or hot topics or areas that you would like, please forward, I guess, to Pam, and she will make sure Danae gets them. We hope you'll spread the word. I always asked whenever I concluded the Futures Assembly that I founded to feature award-winning programs, did all of you learn something new in the series that you didn't know otherwise? Well, awesome. We met our goals then. So thank you so much, and have a great weekend. We appreciate it.